Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have to thank my lovely avatar who introduced us. Was that Tilda, I think? I'll have to verify that, Marta.
Yes, that was Tilda.
Yes, I got it.
Nice.
Again, welcome and thanks for coming today. If you are new to WellSaid Labs, maybe you saw us on a LinkedIn post or you're just now in your free trial, I am so excited that you are going to get to hear some of the best AI voice avatars that you've ever heard before. And Marta's going to break it all down for us. And for those of you who are longtime customers or new customers, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I think you're going to learn a lot of things today that are going to make your work a little bit easier tomorrow. So we just have a couple of things we want to get through before I turn it over to Marta and we get started. Marta, let's go through just the agenda for today. We're going to have just a couple little announcements, introductions, and things. And then we're going to hear a fully produced example that Marta has made for us today. And then she's going to kind of break it down for us and show us exactly how to get that pronunciation just the way she wanted it, how to get the most out of Studio using respellings, the pronunciation library, and then kind of go over some of the features that you might not have seen in there with our team collaboration and some other exciting things to show you. And then also we have a Q&A at the end of this session. And so we're hoping you all are going to save all your toughest questions for Marta. And you can
Easy.
either, or your easiest
Yeah.
questions, right? They don't have to be tough. But you can put those in the Q&A tab there at the bottom throughout, and then we'll get to those at the end as we have time. Um, Quickly too, for the just housekeeping things that we like to go over. Thank you for introducing yourselves in the chat. We just love seeing like where all of our WellSaid people are listening from. It's so fun to see how you might be using the different accents depending on where you are, and just to know a little bit more about you all. So keep that up. We love having a lot of conversation, interaction. What are your best tips? That kind of thing as we go through this chat. Also, we will be recording all of this and sending a replay to all registrants. And we'll also put that on our social media and on our blog. So keep an eye out for the replay. If you need to duck out early or you want to share it with a coworker, you're going to have the full replay of this session. And then, yeah, it looks like most of you have already figured this out, but just be sure in the chat that if you want to talk to everybody, not just me and Marta, just toggle that everyone portion there. All right, so my lovely coworker Marta here, who is the manager of customer success, she is the pro of studios, and she is going to teach us all a thing or two today about how to use Studio the best. So Marta, where are we going to start today?
Lovely. Thank you so much for that great introduction. I'll stop sharing my screen here for a moment. Thank you all for joining today. Super excited to share some best practices and everything. As Caroline went over with our agenda, I'll start by showing a kind of final production with kind of video, music, audio that you're able to create and using with using WellSaid Labs voiceover. From there, we'll kind of deconstruct that voiceover in Studio. I'll share some of the challenges that I ran into, best practices to kind of help you get to that final beautiful production. After that, then I'll just be sharing some general best practices with respellings, pronunciation, tips and tricks, everything like that. And then again, going into that Q&A. So with the Q&A too, I love the engagement in the chat, but if you have questions for me in particular, please put that into the Q&A button and we'll address that in the end. So great. Without further ado, I'm going to start sharing my screen for that final production. Again, I'll just share this and then we'll go into how I created this with the voiceover. So 1 second here.
I'm loving seeing, yeah, we've got a lot of Texas people. We were all in Austin last week for an offsite, and a few of us might have bought cowboy hats and been a
Look
little
at us
cliche.
meeting Caroline. Caroline bought a cowboy hat, so and it's bright pink. She looks amazing in it. No shade, though. Okay, great. Well, I will press play on this, and we can listen to this final production.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings. Even if unnoticed by most people, the world's most successful brands have an audio identity. Food companies like Hot Pockets, Domino's, and Olive Garden rely on specific taglines and short music clips across their marketing to capture attention and influence listener emotion. Insurance ads find celebrities or voice actors who bring the necessary gravitas and trustworthiness to their narration. Companies often integrate their audio branding with good visual design as well, using every tool at their disposal to connect with audiences. The recent Star Wars shows are a great example. On Disney's streaming service, the opening for each episode brings together memorable audio and visuals from Star Wars films. Helmets, silhouettes, and characters flash by on the screen, while specific sound effects and voices play from past Star Wars movies. Then, as the Disney Plus logo appears, an animated flourish is matched with the sound of a lightsaber. The Disney Plus marketing team understands the brand's strengths, relying on well-known audio effects and visuals to create the perfect soundscape for their ads and introductions.
Woohoo! So again, that was just an example of some marketing content that you can create for your team, and then power that content with well-said voices. That script was actually written by Caroline in a lovely blog post she released a few months ago. But now let's talk about how you can bring that to life with voice. So I am going to start sharing my screen for Studio, and we can deconstruct that example. So great. Essentially, whenever you are first logging into Studio, my number one recommendation is to view yourself as a director. And just like you would be directing a real voice actor, you need to do the same with our voice avatars. And honestly, the first step with this is being a casting director. So you need to audition the different avatars to find the sound that works best for you and the content that you're creating. So to do this, I first select more avatars in the bottom right corner, and this will display all 53 of the different avatars that are available on our platform for our creative and producer tiers. If you are on our maker tier, you have access to recently 24 of our avatars. But let's say that you have access to all of these 53 different avatars. You can start scrolling through here to kind of start getting an idea of who these avatars are. We can see a bit of keywords on them of what language they speak, their country of origin here, and then a quick example of what different styles that they speak in. These different styles, we have 4 different styles: narration, promo, conversational, and character. Narration, promo, and conversational are definitely our most popular, and I'll kind of get into the different use cases for those in a sec. But note that we do just have one character style, and this is Gary. I believe this is Caroline's favorite voice avatar. His voice is just so unique that he's identified as a character. He's lovely. So as you're going in and playing around with these different avatars, you can hear a quick preview by selecting the play button on the avatar of what they sound like. However, general best practice is to use a script or excuse me, a line or two from the script that you're creating to get a better idea of what they sound like with your own content. So let's jump into Ava right here. And Ava's definitely one of our most popular avatars. And one of the reasons that I love her is that she has all of our 3 most popular different styles. So when I'm auditioning the different avatars, let's say I want to audition Ava, and in particular, I want to kind of audition those 3 different styles. What I do is I take, just the first sentence or an impactful statement, sentence from my script that I have just copied and pasted on my second monitor over here, paste it directly into the text box and select create. I'm going to do a bit of rapid fire here as well to kind of show you the differences in these 3 different styles to kind of help us narrow down which style is best for us in the content that I'm creating here. So I had narration selected first, then I have promo selected, going to select create, and finally conversational, selecting create. Now let's hear a breakdown of what these 3 different styles sound like. First, starting with narration.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings.
Great. So narration is fantastic, especially in our e-learning and online training industry. It's very professional sounding, very storytelling-like, and honestly, already that's sounding like a front runner style for just that kind of content that I was creating in that final production. Next, let's listen to promo.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings.
Great. And promo, I love because it definitely has that energy and enthusiasm. Fantastic in our kind of commercial spaces, advertising spaces, or any kind of promotional content that you might be creating, but also just great if you want that kind of energy and enthusiasm into your scripts. And finally, we have conversational.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings.
Great. And so with conversational too, definitely very natural sounding with how you just be speaking with a friend or colleague. It sounds like Ava's just in the room with us, right? Having a conversation. So all 3 of these fantastic options. However, thinking about which style works best for your content. Of those 3 different styles that I heard, I think that narration is the best for the content that I'm creating. So I'm going to narrow down my auditioning to just the narration style. What I would do next here is select more avatars again, and I can actually search just by narration and see all of the avatars that have that narration style here. As you can see, narration definitely is one of our most popular, so majority of our avatars do have that style. But let's listen to another avatar, and this is usually the point in the conversation where I love to ask people who their favorite avatar is. So please throw in the chat who your favorite avatar is. If you've been on a conversation with me in the past, you probably already know who mine is. It is Tobin. It has gotten to a point internally where I love Tobin so much that it's kind of developed into a bit of an unhealthy obsession, to the point where my coworkers built little Tobin, I love Tobin stickers for me that I have everywhere. My significant other was a little concerned by that, so that was fun to explain. But I'm seeing a lot of fun examples in here as well. And Caroline, I think I might have spoiled it earlier, but who else besides Gary?
Actually, you're wrong. I do like Gary because he sounds so realistic. Like he sounds like a grandpa you've met 100 times in your life. But I think my favorite is actually, I hope I say this right. Someone in a previous webinar from the UK corrected me. Dermot. It's spelled Diarmid, but he's the Scottish one. Pretty sure you say Dermot. Again, I just think he sounds so realistic and kind of warm, and yeah, he's probably my favorite.
Yeah, that's a good one. And that's a good point to bring up too, of the different accents that we have. Several different accents ranging from Scottish, British, Australian, UK, Southern American. The list goes on. So you can always search for that too by searching the country in the more avatars section.
And then if I could just jump in, someone was asking why some avatars have more styles than others. And really, just to answer that real quick, that's dependent on our voice actors and what they choose to do with us, because they actually have to record a completely new set of recordings for us to train their avatar with for each individual style. So, to speak in a promotional voice for several hours of recording, not everybody wants to do that, but we are working to add more styles to the existing avatars as well as additional new avatars.
Yep, absolutely. And thanks for clarifying that. And yeah, so it's fun just looking at the chat right now. We're seeing kind of all of, a little bit of everyone, which is fantastic to see. So again, as you're going through, I am trying to broaden my horizons a little bit and not exclusively listen to Tobin. So I definitely recommend everyone doing the same. If you're stuck on Tobin, try to branch out and try out these different avatars. And we are constantly releasing new avatars, new styles for existing avatars and things like that. So it is kind of fun to play around. But because I do have an unhealthy obsession, let's just listen to how Tobin would say this.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings.
Honestly, chef's kiss. That was great, Tobin. However, I do have to say I'm broadening my horizons, so let's listen to a couple others before narrowing down. Again, I can search narration to kind of sort through who exactly that I'm looking for. Scrolling through all the different options here. And maybe let's listen to Paula. So Paula is actually one of our newly released avatars, and she is a Mexican-American and has a subtle Spanish accent, which is lovely to hear. So let's listen to how Paula sounds.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings.
So that sounded pretty good too, right? However, maybe not exactly what I'm looking for. And as I was going through and auditioning, and I saw in the chat a lot of the name Tara coming up. And so Tara is kind of slipping in there as my new favorite. Let's listen to how she sounds with this.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings.
Great. So that sounded pretty good. And so ding, 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 Tara is the winner for my different auditioning exercise here. So once we've gone through and auditioned the different avatars and selected the avatar that we want to go with our content that we're creating, as you can see here, I just generated a lot of different clips that I know I'm not going to be using in my final production. I always recommend going in and deleting these clips that you're not going to be using later on. And again, this just helps to ensure that you get that clip credit back to your account. So I'm just going to go in and delete these because we know that we have Tara selected. Awesome. From here, I'm just going to remove that clip that we had in the content there. And now what I'm going to do is just copy and paste the entire script that I have into the text box. So again, pulling from my Word doc that I have on my other monitor, pasting directly into here. And a couple things to point out right off the bat. One is that this is about 1,200 characters. And so this definitely brings into point the different render options that we have. You have the ability to render a clip in a single take, essentially creating just one clip for that audio if it is under 1,000 characters. And so because this is over that 1,000 characters, it will automatically repopulate to rendering by paragraph. Rendering by paragraph is defined by a space such as so here. And so this would render into 4 different paragraphs that we can see right there, 4 out of 16. So you can render up to 16 paragraphs. I know that I just want to actually break this into 2 separate paragraphs. So I'm just going to remove that space in between here. And we can see that this is generated as 2 paragraphs, which will be 2 different clips instead of that, instead of 4. From here, I'm just going to select create and we can listen to this as is. As I select create, and as I was doing that before, essentially our AI is making predictions on how to pronounce each sentence and word as naturally as possible. Hopefully we'll do a better job than I'm able to speak and pronounce. And as I was just saying that, the production is already, or the clips are already created. So now let's listen to how each of these clips sound just as is without any adjustments made. First, starting with the first paragraph.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings. Even if unnoticed by most people, the world's most successful brands have an audio identity. Food companies like Hot Pockets, Domino's, and Olive Garden rely on specific taglines and short music clips across their marketing to capture attention and influence listener emotion. Insurance ads find celebrities or voice actors who bring the necessary gravitas and trustworthiness to their narration.
Great. So sounded pretty good, but there are definitely some adjustments that I would want to make. The number one thing that stood out is the pronunciation of gravitas. So she didn't pronounce it exactly how I would like. And so this is where pronunciation comes into play, and in particular, our new respelling system. So for those of you who have not played along with our respellings, we'll definitely dig into that right now. However, I definitely encourage you as well to go to our respellings documentation, help center, as well as we have an entire webinar based on respellings as well. So to dig into respellings, there are a couple different ways to go to our Help Center guide. However, one of the easiest ways is to select pronunciation over on the left-hand side here, and we have a link directly to our pronunciation best practices and help centers by selecting Learn More here. I can select directly into respellings as well as our reference charts. And so again, for those of you who have not played around with respellings too much, I highly recommend playing around with this as much as possible. It is essentially a way to give precise instruction to our AI on how to pronounce each individual syllable. So essentially, our incredibly amazing and smart voice team has created our own alphabet to get that phonetic spelling and pronunciation as accurate as possible. So if I'm speaking of the word gravitas, essentially what I would do is break down each individual syllable to get it pronounced exactly how I would like. Starting with that gra syllable, I would want to do a G, R, and then looking for that like ah sound. There are a few different pronunciations of the letter A, correct? But I would probably want more like the spa, so AH. For my second syllable, I would want V. And so I would have a V in that, and then an I sound, I as in IH. And then my third syllable, toss, starting with a T, and then again, more of that ah sound as in spa, AH, and then an S. So to put together how this actually looks like, I'm going to go back into Studio, and we have a great way of kind of testing that pronunciation over on the the right-hand side. All I need to do is put in the correct spelling, if I can figure out how to spell it right, gravitas, and then that respellings. So to let our system know that you are using respellings, you'll need to start and end with a double colon. And then for an added emphasis of a sound or syllable in pronunciation, you can put it in all caps. So I want to emphasize gra. So I'd put this in all caps, dash, vi, toss, toss, like we went through. I can do a quick test of how this would sound by selecting the play button here.
Gravitas.
And that sounded perfect to me. So again, you can see how quick and easy it is to use pronunciation and respellings with the combination of our respellings guide in the chart, as well as the pronunciation kind of pronunciation guide over here. So all I would need to do is select add to library. And essentially what this does is whenever gravitas comes up in my future scripts, it will always be replaced with that respellings that we just input. So this will save you a ton of time down the road. And essentially it only means that you need to go through that respellings guide for an individual word or acronym or anything like that once. So great. So once I have that added to my script, I'm good to go on the pronunciation for gravitas. Next, I will want to make adjustments to the some of the like emphasis and pausing that I heard in the scripts. So one thing I actually want to do as well is instead of working on the entire script that we have here, I just want to focus on that first paragraph. So whenever you want to repopulate just the script that you're currently working on, you can select the repopulate text button, and that will pull up just the script that we're working on. So I guess it didn't change too much from what we were working on earlier, but essentially it removed that second paragraph. Great. So from here, a couple adjustments that I took note of as we were listening to it the first time. One, I thought that there was a bit of a not as much of a pause as I was hoping for after this Olive Garden. How I would like this to be read is food companies like Hot Pockets, Domino's, and Olive Garden rely on specific taglines. However, I thought that it was sped through a bit more than I would naturally speak it. So I'm just going to add a comma in there to kind of add that additional pause. Another thing that I want to add is some emphasis to the second to last sentence here, or I guess it's the same sentence. In this sentence, it says short music clips across their marketing to capture attention and influence listener emotion. I want to add some additional emphasis to capture attention, right? To really capture your attention. So to add emphasis to a word or phrase, I'm just going to put quotation marks around that, and that will add that additional punch there. So I added in the pronunciation, I added in the emphasis, and I added in an additional pause. Those were kind of the main adjustments that I would like to make. What I would do from here is just select create, and hopefully once we listen to this again, it will be the kind of final draft that I was hoping for, just with those few adjustments. Awesome. So now let's listen to it.
Audio branding refers to how a soundscape represents a company, including sound effects, musical choices, and voiceover recordings. Even if unnoticed by most people, the world's most successful brands have an audio identity. Food companies like Hot Pockets, Domino's, and Olive Garden rely on specific taglines and short music clips across their marketing to capture attention and influence listener emotion. Insurance ads find celebrities or voice actors who bring the necessary gravitas and trustworthiness to their narration.
Awesome. Chef's kiss to that. We could definitely hear that additional pause with the use of punctuation, the added emphasis over capture attention, as well as gravitas was pronounced exactly how I would like. So I would definitely call this clip my final draft. What I would do in this scenario is delete my first draft. And then for my final draft, I always recommend renaming these. We'll get into this a little bit later in regards to best practice for naming convention, but if you are working on a Teams account and working together collaboratively and dynamically, I do recommend throwing in your initials to the clip so you know that you are the one that created that clip. And again, we'll kind of get into that a little bit later, but I'm just going to name this MM Audio Branding Paragraph 1. Again, your own internal naming convention, definitely up to you. However, throwing in your initials can definitely be helpful when you are working collaboratively together. Awesome. Now let's work on that second paragraph. So again, when I want to pull up the script of that second paragraph to look on it, all I need to do is select that repopulate text button, and it appears back up in the text editor. And now let's just listen to play and listen to how it sounds just as is.
Companies often integrate their audio branding with good visual design as well, using every tool at their disposal to connect with audiences. The recent Star Wars shows are a great example. On Disney's streaming service, the opening for each episode brings together memorable audio and visuals from Star Wars films. Helmets, silhouettes, and characters flash by on the screen, while specific sound effects and voices play from past Star Wars movies. Then, as the Disney Plus logo appears, an animated flourish is matched with the sound of a lightsaber. The Disney Plus marketing team understands the brand's strengths, relying on well-known audio effects and visuals to create the perfect soundscape for their ads and introductions.
Okay, great. So sounded pretty good. The number one thing that stood out to me though, and please throw into the chat if you're a Star Wars fan, but kind of butchered the pronunciation of a lightsaber, correct? So this is definitely the first word that I would want to address in my respellings. Again, I can just jump over to kind of the quick guide over here, put in the correct spelling of lightsaber, and then add in the updated respellings that I would like to have. Light is pretty self-explanatory and not likely a word our AI would run into difficulty with, so I can keep that as is, but saber was kind of the difficult part. So what I would do here is add in those 2 colons, and then pronunciation for say, S-A-Y, and emphasize say, and then burr here. We can listen to a quick example of what this would sound like.
Lightsaber.
Perfect. So great. From there, I would just add to library, and that should be good to go for whenever I bring up lightsabers in my future scripts, which that'd be fun if that happened all the time, right? Cool. A couple other things that I took note of when going through the different scripts. She pronounced Star Wars pretty naturally throughout the multiple different references. However, I did think that there was kind of an awkward pause on this first pronunciation. I believe she pronounced it more, like Star Wars, and I want this to be more pronounced naturally as in one word, like Star Wars. So in a situation like that, you can just add a hyphen in between 2 words, and that will kind of conjoin it together to sound a bit more natural like. Another example too, when we had this second sentence of the recent Star Wars shows are a great example. On Disney's streaming service, I kind of want this to sound more like 2 sentences rather than kind of 1 sentence with a colon. And this is a really important note to make when you're creating content and writing your scripts, to write scripts for the listener and not for the reader, right? And so one thing that always comes to mind is that your scripts might not necessarily be grammatically correct when it comes to adding in different punctuation, quotation marks, and things like that. However, thinking of this as a way of giving cues to the different avatars, just like you would that real voice actor. So in this example, I'm just going to change this to a period and then kind of make this a new sentence of on Disney streaming service. Great. So those were kind of the 3 major updates that I wanted to make to this script. From here, again, I'll just select create and see if these pronunciations are updated how I'd like, and the different pausing and kind of, I guess, conjoined word of Star Wars sounds how I'd like. So let's give it a listen.
Companies often integrate their audio branding with good visual design as well, using every tool at their disposal to connect with audiences. The recent Star Wars shows are a great example. On Disney's streaming service, the opening for each episode brings together memorable audio and visuals from Star Wars films. Helmets, silhouettes, and characters flash by on the screen, while specific sound effects and voices play from past Star Wars movies. Then, as the Disney Plus logo appears, an animated flourish is matched with the sound of a lightsaber. The Disney Plus marketing team understands the brand's strengths, relying on well-known audio effects and visuals to create the perfect soundscape for their ads and introductions.
Awesome. So that sounded perfect to me, exactly how I would like her to read it. Definitely sounded as natural as possible. She nailed lightsaber, so that was fun to hear as well. In this example, I just went ahead and deleted that first draft, and now we have our final draft. From here, again, I'm going to rename with my initials, say audio branding P1, and now paragraph 2. And now from here, I have those 2 final clips. However, as I was importing this into, and I was just using iMovie to create that final production from earlier, I do just want this as one singular clip and not broken down into 2 clips. So in this situation, no problem at all. All I would need to do is select both clips, making sure the clip that I want to be read first is at the bottom. So this is kind of what helps out about saying paragraph 1 and paragraph 2 in your naming convention. And then I would just need to select combine, name this, I'll throw in my initials, audio branding final, And then one thing to note as well is that you do have the ability to adjust the pausing in between those two clips when you're combining them. You can have a small pause of 0.3 seconds, natural pause of 0.8, or a long pause of 1.2 seconds. In this, it makes the most sense to just have that natural pause. From here, I would select create clip, and then essentially I'm just merging those two clips together so I can easily draft that or paste that into my iMovie final production. From here, essentially, I'm ready to go, and all I would need to do is select download, decide if I want to download it as an MP3, WAV, or OGG file. I want this to be downloaded as an MP3 file. I would download it here, and as you can see, the beauty of renaming all of your different clips as well is that the clip file is named after what you named it in Studio. So not only does this help in your internal organization in WellSaid, but also helps externally as well. Another thing that I love to make note of when I'm creating these final productions is that majority of the time you're not creating this on your own, right? Like when I was creating this post-production or final production, I really wanted Caroline's backup on this, and I wanted her to listen to it to make sure it was good. You know, she wrote the script, so I wanted to have her, let me know how to pronounce gravitas correctly. And honestly, the jury's still out on that one, right? So from here, when I want to include my different teammates, this is where projects come into play. And the one thing to note about projects, you will definitely be able to utilize the capabilities in projects in regards to team collaboration if you are on a team account. However, if you're on an individual account, you still have the ability to use projects in regards to just a way to organize the different content that you're creating. When I think about projects, it's definitely those two ways. One is just the organizing of files and different content in the projects folders, as well as that team collaboration capability. So I have my project that I was just working on here, creative session created by Marta. Now I want to share this with Caroline to get her feedback and say, Marta, that's not how you pronounce gravitas. What I would do in here is I select the menu button on the project and select share. From here, a few different options populate, kind of like a Google Docs functionality. First, starting with anyone with link, I can select can access, and this creates a public link that is actually great for your teammates that do not have access to WellSaid. So if you want to send this to your boss for approval, to your clients to approval, anything like that, you can create this public link by just selecting anyone with link can access, copying this to your clipboard and sending that over to those people. Note that anyone that does not have access to WellSaid will only be able to listen to the content. They will not have any downloading or editing capabilities. For those who are on a Teams account with you and do have access to WellSaid, we do have some extended capabilities for team collaboration. One is you can give everyone on your team either full access, which would allow them to share, edit, and download, just editing and downloading capabilities, or just viewing and downloading capabilities. So if I wanted to give full access to my team, I could do so by selecting that here. But let's say I just want to give access to Caroline because I don't want to, blow up everyone else's projects. I would go in here, select Caroline. Oh, Tobin's in here. That's crazy. So I select Tobin too, update, and then this would just be giving full access to Tobin. I'd much rather work with you, Caroline, though, so don't worry.
Yeah, you don't have to pretend. I know where I stand with Tobin.
Great. So from there, then your projects would populate in either a personal tab, which all of your projects populate by default. So you are the only person that can view, edit, access. If you shared with one or a few individuals, it would display in the shared tab, which we can see the creative session tab or the creative session project just appeared here. Or if you shared it with your entire team, it would appear in the team folder. So great. From here, my creative session is complete. I downloaded it and then just imported into my post-production tool. Now let's switch gears a little bit and just go over some more general kind of best practices and tips and tricks, focusing on pronunciation. So let's create a new project here by selecting new project on the top. I'm going to select project name. Let's just say pronunciation, best practices. And I can never spell when people are watching me spell, so don't make fun of me if I spell those wrong. Another best practice too when it comes to creating project names, and again, of course, this is whatever works best for your own internal naming convention, but we do have the optional text block to type in a client name. If you do have quite a big team, you can use just your own names on this, or if a client name, whatever works best, and this will kind of help you identify who created what project, especially if you're sharing your projects with a bunch of different people. So I'm just going to say created by Marta Mueller. Awesome. So now creating a new project, and let's jump into that over here in my personal projects. Let's go through a few different examples. So again, I definitely want to show off some kind of challenges and solutions to what you might run into in regards to industry specific words, acronyms, abbreviations, initialisms, and all of that fun stuff. So going to pop a text into the text editor here. And as I paste this into the text editor, I'd love for people in the chat to make your guesses on what the AI might struggle with. So here's the example. So throw in the chat where you think she might have difficulty. And I'm actually going to choose a different avatar. Let's select Jordan here. And I'm going to select create. Any guesses on where there might be? Yep, POTUS. POTUS inflotus. Awesome. Yep, the years. All great guesses. Let's listen to how this sounds as is.
The acronym POTUS, President of the United States, also began as a telegraphic code around 1895. FLOTUS, First Lady of the United States, didn't appear until the 1980s, where it may have originated as the Secret Service's code name for Nancy Reagan.
Great. So she definitely struggled with POTUS, FLOTUS, and Reagan. However, absolutely nailed the years, which was great to see, especially with a year like 1980s. Good job, Jordan. So with POTUS and FLOTUS, that kind of acronym, definitely a great way, opportunity to use respellings again. So in here, I just put in FLOTUS first. And then with the respellings, I can jump into the chart. You'll get to a certain point when you're using respellings that you kind of memorize it a little bit. But I would want an F, an L, and then an O, as in oat right here, so OH. And then TUS would just be TUHS. So going into here, and I'm going to add some emphasis, so putting in all caps to flow. And then TUS. Let's hear how that sounds.
FLOTUS.
Perfect. Add to library. POTUS. This one is easy after we already did FLOTUS. So pretty much the same, but with a P. TUS. Add to library. And then lastly, Reagan. Put in the correct spelling. And then I would probably want this more like Ray. And then like gun. Awesome. Let's listen to that.
Reagan.
Perfect. Add to library. From here,
Hey,
once that.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. We had some interesting questions. When you are using that pronunciation library, is that universal to all of the avatars or just the one that you're using right now?
Great question. So this will be universal for all the different avatars. Good question. Awesome. So yeah, going in here, and that actually does bring up another good point that I meant to mention earlier in regards to sharing your pronunciation libraries between teammates. So I'll sidetrack myself a little bit for a second. When you are adding to your library, all of these different words and phrases are populating into your pronunciation library that you can go and reference on the left-hand side here by selecting pronunciation. And as we can see, all of those different words have populated right in here. And now let's say, I'm going in creating a lot of different content and I want to share all of this with Caroline so she doesn't need to go in and kind of redo that work. All I would need to do is select export library. This is exported as a CSV file with all of the different pronunciations that I've added. I send this over to Caroline via email or Slack or whatever works. And then all she would need to do is just import library, select the file that I sent over to her. And there are a few different import behaviors. Do not overwrite duplicates, or overwrite entire library. Up to you on your preferred workflow. I usually recommend overwrite duplicates. That just ensures that you're kind of keeping your library, but just importing those new ones. But again, up to you. So thank you for asking that question, because that sparked an answer to a question that probably came up before too. Awesome. So now with those adjustments that we made to POTUS and FLOTUS and Reagan, let's listen to how this sounds.
The acronym POTUS, President of the United States, also began as a telegraphic code around 1895. FLOTUS, First Lady of the United States, didn't appear until the 1980s, where it may have originated as the Secret Service's code name for Nancy Reagan.
Great. So sounded pretty good. And also, I have to call attention to the jokes in the chat of Reagan, and speaking of Star Wars references. Genius. Good for you guys. Awesome. So now with those two examples, let's jump into another one here. I'm going to paste into the chat. And again, please write in the chat how you think she might, or what words you think she might have difficulty with. And actually, let's change avatars on this one as well. Cameron, I really enjoy. They're one of our new avatars and our first non-binary avatar, which is very exciting. So let's listen to how they pronounce this.
Real wasabi is challenging to make and expensive. As an alternative, most wasabi for sale is colored horseradish with flavorings.
Okay, great. So y'all were pretty correct on the wasabi. And now I'd love your help on how you think I should spell wasabi with respellings. So if you can throw that into the chat of how you, or what your recommendations are for wasabi, and I can put this on the screen for a sec too. Wasabi. Perfect. Okay, a few different examples. I like it. Let's use one of these in here. So let's see. Wasabi. I'll just pick a random person's wasabi. Oop. Of course. I think I saw this one come up. Let's listen to how that goes.
Wasabi.
Pretty good. So whoever spelled it like that absolutely nailed it. So I'm just going to add that to the library and then select create again. And let's listen to how it's improved from there.
Real wasabi is challenging to make and expensive. As an alternative, most wasabi for sale is colored horseradish with flavorings.
Fantastic. So that sounded pretty great. And one thing that I definitely want to call attention to with the pronunciation and respellings, as we see in the chat here, several different examples of how this could be pronounced correctly. And that's a good thing, right? I'm sure several of the different examples that all of you have in here would sound great. And one thing to note too is that sometimes pronunciation can be personal preference, right? If we think about like data versus data and caramel versus caramel and things like that, just add to the library how you personally pronounce it. Awesome. So we have 10 minutes left and I know a million questions have come in. So from here, I think I will stop with best practices and we can jump into our Q&A section. What do you think about that, Caroline?
So many questions.
In like 10 minutes, we're not going to be able to get to them all.
Yes, but we can at least, kind of get through the bulk of these, hopefully. All right, I'm going to jump right in. We had a question about when you were talking about deleting the clips that you aren't going to use so that they don't go towards your clip count, can you talk a little bit more about clip count or like download counting? And is it when it's rendered? Is it when you download it? How does that work?
Great question. So essentially, clips are only counted when you download that clip or when you combine the clips. So you can create as many clips as you want, but as long as you go in, delete that clip and did not download it or combine it, then you will get that credit back to your account. So this essentially allows for unlimited retakes when you're going in, playing around with the different audio, pronunciation, and things like that.
Love it. One thing I wanted to be sure, and I'll throw this in the chat too, that we covered is when people encounter problems or they have product suggestions or they need a different avatar than what they're finding, where should we send that kind of feedback?
Fantastic question as well. So as we can see on the screen right now, always feel free to reach out to support@wellsaidlabs.com for any questions in regards to pronunciation, best practices, even with billing or things like that. If you do have a designated customer success manager, please reach out to them as well. And finally, we do have a support chat functionality that appears in the bottom right corner of WellSaid Studio. That is available between 9 and 4 p.m. Pacific time. That will connect you with my absolutely lovely and brilliant teammates, Jen and Marina, and they are able to provide support with pretty much whatever you need. They're fantastic.
And what about like product requests or avatar requests, that kind of thing?
Great question again. We love feedback over here. So always feel free to reach out to your customer success manager, the support email, or in the chat functionality. Let us know like, hey, I really need XYZ, or hey, I would love if you had, Spanish or things like that. All of the feedback that you send to our team, we essentially relay that directly to, our product team, our voice team, to kind of help with future prioritization. So definitely view the customer success team at WellSaid as your kind of internal product advocates, and know that we got your back and want these built as much as you do. So the more feedback, the better it kind of helps us prioritize moving forward.
Absolutely. I do see a few more like very specific questions about clips and account limits and things like that. And that's something we can ask in the chat as well. I'm also going to look up the link for that section in our help center while Marta answers the next question. Okay, lots of questions about questions. Do you have any more tips on getting the inflection right at the end of a question? One thing we've learned, which I had never thought about, is depending on a yes or no question or a multiple answer question, we don't always go up at the end. Sometimes we go down. And so it's hard to train the avatars on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked a lot with our voice team about this, and it's challenging, right, for AI. So my suggestions with questions, and knowing that sometimes the inflection goes up, sometimes the inflection goes down, is to, one, get a little creative with punctuation, adding in emphasis on the last, using quotation marks on the last word to kind of help with that, emphasis, to kind of help with the different inflection, or adding in different commas and pausing and things in that sentence to kind of help change the dynamic. Also, we've definitely seen a great success or improvement with our latest voice model for questions. This latest voice model was released back in August. So my number one recommendation is really to make sure that you're on our latest model, as well as we have seen a great improvement with our conversational style when it comes to questions. So if you do have a lot of questions in your scripts, my recommendation would be to go with that conversational style.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I also see a lot of questions about why do some avatars pronounce something right and others don't? And neither of us are like the voice team experts, but I've had them on enough webinars, I'm going to try to answer it. Essentially, each avatar is training on the data set that the voice actor records for that particular avatar. And so because of that, they're working with different scripts. And so one data set might train better in certain subtle pronunciations, and another one trains differently with different pronunciations based on the script that they're recording. So again, machine learning, sometimes there are variations that we can't always smooth out across the two when they're training separately. But Marta, does that sound close to you?
Yeah, I think the number one takeaway with that too is just always remembering that these avatars in WellSaid are real voice actors. So there will be some kind of discrepancies between the different avatars, especially if we're thinking about speed. You know, for example, Tobin is a very fast speaker, and I feel like that's why I like him so much. But there are avatars that are just naturally slower speakers because the real voice actor is a slower speaker. So there will be some slight discrepancies in between each of the avatars, or differences, maybe not discrepancies is the right word.
Yes. Oh, and I've seen a couple questions. I know we're almost out of time here. The pictures of the avatars, are those the actual voice actors? I know the answer to this one, but you want to take it?
Yeah, so they are not the real voice actor, and the purpose of this is to protect that person's identity essentially and keep them anonymous. However, they are a representation of that person.
Absolutely. And furthermore, we like to have the voice actor select the image with us so that they feel it represents them as well. It's not just, oh, I think this person sounds like, this picture or something like that.
Yep.
So we want them to be included in that process, and picking the names too, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, let me see. Let's find one more. Are there certain avatars that are better at, say, technical content than others?
Great question. My recommendation is to mostly just kind of go with the style and pacing. So what I've seen in kind of the more technical space is narration will be a great option just for kind of speaking through and in the most like professional sounding style, as well as maybe going with an avatar that speaks a bit slower. Sometimes some of our faster avatars, Tobin, love ya. But if he's reading through a really complex word kind of fast, maybe it might sound a bit more jumbled than you're hoping for. So going with the slower narration style could be best for those kind of complex technical creations, content.
Okay. I just want to get one last question in because as a marketer, I wrote a blog post about this. I see a couple of questions about ChatGPT integrating with WellSaid Labs, and I personally think that that is a really interesting use case. We are not building anything ourselves that will directly work with ChatGPT as an example, but with our API, there's really endless possibilities of how you can integrate with other AI projects or products that either generate the text or however you want to work with that. So I posted my blog post there. I'd love to hear more thoughts on that as this discussion evolves. Marta, anything else you want to throw in before we let everybody go? We're almost at an hour here.
Yeah, I really just wanted to thank everyone for their time. As you see up here, please reach out to our support email as well as our sales email if you're thinking about becoming a WellSaid customer. I also have my email and Caroline's email up here as well. I'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback for me on my presentations and stuff. You've probably seen other WellSaid webinars with me involved before. So I'd love any feedback that you have for me. And really just thank you everyone for joining. This has been a fun time. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Thanks, Marta. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.